Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to this conference. I'm Lazaros Lazarou, an ACCA by profession. I'm a member of the European Court of Auditors and Chamber 5 with thematic focus on financing and administering the Union. And I'm also the reporting member of the court, the member responsible for the report on the EU accounts. The European Court of Auditors is very pleased to be hosting today's conference on creating value and driving sustainability and the digital agenda through public sector innovation. On behalf of the Court, I welcome you present for this conference. I also welcome colleagues watching us through live stream. Of course, I welcome our distinguished speakers, starting with my colleague Eva Lindstrom, Tonourist, Shiva Dasta, Stavroula Dimitriadis, Pirko Ladelma, Alex Metcalf, Koen Verhoost, Brian McHenry, Emmanuel Baltacci, François Xavier Borsi. The key words in the title of this conference are linked to our work at the Court, and I'm sure linked to your work. We are the EU assisting the European Parliament and Council in the discharge process where the Commission is held to account for the management of EU funds. At the ECA, we endeavour to gear our work and reporting towards creating value. In the chamber that I am heading, we have taken sustainability as a priority topic. Eva Lindstrom has presented a case review in June. She also chairs ECA's Digital Steering Committee. Governments around the world face a vast array of challenges, from declining public trust to technological disruption, from budget reductions to talent shortages. These challenges call for innovative responses. But in the face of demanding and often critical citizens, new social and environmental challenges and accelerating technological change, will an incremental, largely managerially mandated innovation as observed today be sufficient? The answer from the recent ACCA report on innovation in public finance that will be the point of today's discussion is an unambiguous no. Based on 4 distinct research methods, it makes the case for more radical innovation in public finance, while demonstrating that the finance function must play a central role in completing this journey. To address today's interconnected challenges, we indeed need to move from incremental to resulting in full system changes that fundamentally rework how we deliver public services. Alex Metcalf, the head of public sector policy at ACCA, will take us through stages of this report in the first panel session, which he is also moderating. The future is unpredictable. Leaders, whether of nations, cities or institutions like ours or the European Commission, need to be able to experiment and adapt. Of course, dynamic change on this scale is risky, and bringing new ideas to life can be disruptive. Unlike the private sector, moving to radical innovation for the public sector is a challenge. Stability has to be sustained. This is a double bind for the public sector innovator. In the public sector, first-mover advantages do not apply, not just because of the lack of traditional market pressures, but also due to the need to manage risk while trying to scale up. But ultimately, as many of those who responded to ACCA's survey recognized, aiming for transformation may be less risky than hoping to be avoided. They find that status quo is no longer an option. We also see that one of the key methods of achieving radical change is through connection. Radical ideas will often come from a wider network of stakeholders, including the users involved in a program or service. This conference is part of ACCA's quarterly brand theme on the power of. It's through the power of connections that new ideas can translate into concrete actions that will achieve change in public sector finance. We have an impressive lineup of experts. Together, we will myth bust the assumption that innovation and the public sector are antithetical. We will discuss how we can cultivate public sector with our first panel, and with our second panel, we will explore areas where governments are applying innovative practices to improve for citizens, create value while driving sustainability, accountability, and the digital agenda. And now some housekeeping rules before we start. The conference is being live streamed, and we have an interactive Twitter wall under the handle PubSec Innovation, so do not hesitate to react online. You will also find the program together with the biographies of speakers. So let's make the best of this conference, and I now hand over to Alex for this panel discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lazaros, for hosting us here, for this beautiful venue, and also for all the support of your call preparing today's conference. My name is Alex Metcalf, and I'm the head of public sector policy at ACCA. And I've produced the report here that's supposed to be our launch for today's conversation, which is innovation in public finance. And now really in keeping with our green agenda and with the Commission's Green New Deal, instead of producing the report itself and today, what we've done is produce a QR code. If you take your phone, put that over the QR code, it'll pop up on the phone. So that's a good way for us to share today's findings and instead. Good. Looking forward to the future. And in general, I'd also like to say that I'm delighted to be able to host today's panel discussion with an excellent group before us. And we're going to be discussing how to cultivate public sector innovation. And really, there's a lot of thought-provoking ideas to come from today's panel. We've had an initial discussion with, and I think there's a lot for us to explore here. But what I'd like to very quickly do, and I think you did this very well, Lazaros, as well, is point to the Twitter wall here, because this isn't just us communicating to you. This is equally you participating in the conversation as we're presenting to you. And at the same time, I'd also like to point out that we'll have question and answers at the end of this. So we really want to try and keep this as interactive as possible. So to start us off, let me very briefly show you, if I can grab the clicker here, very good. Let me show you just a couple of slides from the work that we completed within ACCA, looking at innovation in public finance. So first, I think a really first order question, and a good one for us to set out as we begin today's conference, is what do we actually talk about when we say innovation, and innovation in a public sector context as well. So as part of the research that we completed at ACCA, we did a literature review trying to understand the landscape as it stands and what it means to innovate in public sector. And what we saw quite consistently is that there were three factors that made up innovation. The first is that an innovation or an innovative initiative had to be new, but actually it had to be new to the context. So this didn't have to be something that new globally, something the first time it's ever been done, but new to your organization or your context. So that's the first condition. The second one had actually been implemented. And I think that's quite an important one here, because often when we think about innovation, we have kind of pie in the sky, imagining what we could be doing, but this actually has to have happened on the ground. So that's our second condition. And the final one, and an interesting one in a public sector context, is that it has to have sought to improve public value as well. And what we mean by that, I think in the sector context, a much easier definition. It's are you increasing competitive advantage, improving your bottom line? It's a bit more complicated in a public sector context, isn't it? And therefore, the idea of improving public value or seeking to improve public value is another very important one when we think about innovation in a public sector context. Then on the graph on the right-hand side of this slide, one of the results from our ACCA member survey. So we had 4,500 responses in this particular survey. And the kind of first question that we wanted to understand is, to what extent is innovation occurring within a public sector context? And what we saw broadly is there is actually quite a bit of innovation, both in the sector, just as common actually between the sectors, and more particularly, it was much more likely to be happening across the organization as well. So collaboration feature here. But what I'd like to share with you now is really the actual frame of the entire report. report, and it's what we called the innovation compass instead. And this is based, again, on other ideas that are circulating within the literature. I think we'll hear from some others from OPSI, other frameworks that exist. But this was really helpful for us in understanding what kind of innovation is happening right now, but also, I think, even more importantly, innovation we need to face the complex challenges of the public sector today. So there were two variables that we used in creating this. The first was whether the innovation was directed. So is it top-down, is it management-led, or is it undirected? Is it coming from the grassroots? Is it much more organic instead? The other variable that we used in our compass was the incremental or radical nature of the innovation. So incremental innovation, as you might imagine, is kind of changes along the edges of systems instead, trying to make smaller changes that result in improvements in efficiency or effectiveness. Radical information can be full transformation of systems instead. And I think importantly, something coming through literature more and more is also the distribution of power within systems and how that can change how we create public value. So what I'll show to you now is the response that came back from our public sector members in answering this survey in how they saw their current environment. That, yeah, you have innovation happening in your organization at the moment. What does that look like? What's the landscape? So here's that picture. So what you'll see is the blue areas are the ones where there was the most concentration of response. Red, white was somewhere in between. And then you'll see quite small, two little asterisks. That's the median score across the full. So what we can see here is a real concentration in the top left quadrant within directed incremental innovation. But also the majority of it is actually sitting on the side of the compass. So most innovation, it was around 70%, is incremental in nature at the moment. And now I think the interesting question that asked, and a really core finding for this report that I'd like you to if you remember anything, it's remember this, and that's what the next picture will look like. So we then asked them, what is the future state that we need to address today's challenges? Focus your eyes on the blue, for example, and we'll see how this changes. So this is the future state. So you can see that swings right over to radical. I have a majority of ACCA members, finance professionals in the public sector, calling for more radical forms of innovation to meet today's challenges. And I think that's quite a message, actually, that a fairly conservative community, I'd say, maybe looking around the room if you see a little bit of nodding, this is a conservative community that believes we need change. So I think that's our call to action to start us off on the panel today. And the final thing I'd like to share with you before I hand over to our distinguished panelists is the critical role of the foundation in all of this. So one thing that we showcase within the report is the OECD's innovation life cycle, and maybe we'll hear a bit more about that in a moment. And this sets out the cycle of innovation, identifying problems through to implementation, to eventually using lessons. And what we do within the report is demonstrate how the finance function has a critical role to play at every single stage of this innovation life cycle. So to very quickly pick out some examples, if you look in the bottom right corner, in the developing of proposals, we really saw strongly in the qualitative data was that the accountant almost acts as a gatekeeper and taking a role as a lead within business case assessment. So a really important there. Obviously also with this venue and speaking to our auditors, it's important to think about public audit as well. So the role of public audit in terms of diffusing the lessons and identifying new problems that need to be addressed within a public sector context. So that's just a few examples of the areas that we explored within the report. So now I'd like to hand over to Perrette. Perrette leads